I can have your attention, we're short several committee members, but they are several of them who told us they were going to be late getting here. So in fairness to some folks who are here to speak, we're going to go ahead and get started. Kelly, I know you've got places to be too, and Scott's going to be here as long as we need him, so we'll... Kelly, if you want to come on, we'll go ahead and get started.
That being the case, I'm going to save plenty of time for Scott. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. When I spoke to you regarding your FY11
A couple more members coming in. Okay, sir.
The governor is recommending an 8% cut of $477,432. We will manage this cut through ending state fund support for our master teacher program, ending state fund support for our educator recruitment program, and eliminating the research function in our agency. Over the past 3 years, we've made budget decisions that protect our core function, allow us to serve our clients in the best and most efficient way, and maintain high morale and production of all of our remaining staff. We have continued this practice as we make decisions on how to manage FY12 budget. We do have one potential concern to share with you today, and that is the fact that the special investigators regarding the CRCT cases have told us that we could receive up to and possibly exceeding 400 cases from them. We want to process these cases quickly, fairly, and efficiently, and we will make every attempt to do this with existing resources, if it is at all possible to do so, but there is at least some possibility that we will need to speak with you regarding some assistance. Can I answer questions from the committee, please?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we appreciate you being here. But in the news lately has been a lot about the Atlanta public school system. Of those cases that you perceive that may come before you, you got any idea about what's coming out of Atlanta?
Not specifically. I do know that we will have a certain number of cases, and I don't know how many, that will be, for lack of a better term, open and shut, in which the educator has in fact confessed to wrongdoing. So there will be a certain number of cases that will fall into that category. There'll be a certain number of cases that will fall into the category of we can statistically prove that cheating did take place, and then it's a matter of the evidence that can be accumulated in linking that cheating to an individual educator. The standard that we work from relative to PSC in our ethics division is preponderance of the evidence. We must prove that it was more likely that the educator committed the act than it is that they did not commit the act. But those will be, generally speaking, the two kinds of cases we'll get. We will get some cases that the educator has been very forthright, very honest, and told the investigators what they did and how they did it. Then there'll be other cases in which the evidence will have to be pieced together in terms of linking unethical activity to the educator.
Thank you very much.
You have a number of activities that you've been working on, enhancements to certification, new certifications, and then you're moving into this time of the year when you have all these people who are going to be getting certificate upgrades because of advanced degrees and new kids coming out of college. What kind of time lags are these budget constraints going to put onto you in terms of those things, which school systems are going to need as they make their plans for a year, too?
Mr. Chairman, when we've made budget decisions, we have done everything possible to protect our core function. Our core function is ethics, certification, and educator preparation. We have had cuts in those core functions, but I think it is probably a fair statement to say that anything not directly involved in those core functions is no longer paid for with state dollars in PSC. Everything else has been eliminated relative to state dollars. Certification is a very labor-intensive enterprise. I think I remember a number last year that we processed almost 400,000 certifications last year of various different kinds. And we have reduced staff in certification as we've reduced staff in other areas of our agency. We have tried to be more efficient relative to technology. We've gone to a paperless certificate in which we email the educator the certificate and they can elect to print it out, which has saved us a number of dollars. And so far, we have not seen a precipitous drop in customer service relative to certification. We will do our best to maintain that. The cert upgrade rule that I think you alluded to is probably one of the more meaningful things we've done at PSC in the last decade. And basically what the cert upgrade rule does is this. It now requires that advanced degrees, in order to trigger a raise for an educator, be from an institution that offers high-quality programs as measured by standards that we have outlined, and it also requires that the educator's advanced degree be in a field for which we offer certificates. And so we're dealing with rigor and relevancy in those two ways. As you know, we spent last year in state dollars about $800 million paying for advanced degrees, and when you put local dollars into that, it exceeds $1 billion. And all we're really after at PSC is we want advanced degrees to have a very, very positive impact on educator performance. And we feel like that this new rule will gear people to take advanced degree programs that will have an impact on educator performance, because I think we all know now that at least some people are choosing a degree program maybe more on convenience than they are on potential impact. And this cert upgrade rule, I think, does link performance and the advanced degree program to the extent that we can, quote-unquote, legislate. That is also a very labor-intensive enterprise. But we're working on that, and I think it's important for all of us in the state that that be a successful effort.
I've got one more if nobody else has a question. The rules or the bills that were passed last year dealing with administrative certificates and being in field to receive the raise, has there been any impact from the PSC? Are you seeing fewer people applying for administrative certificates? Or
absolutely. Of course, there were some grandfathering provisions that were put into the bill, but the grandfathering provision also had an entry date as well as an exit date. So the entry date really, I think, put some teeth, quote-unquote, into the grandfathering provision. A really candid response is this, and we've seen some positive impact and a little bit of negative. The positive impact is this. The number of educators that hold administrative leadership certification, not in leadership positions, is going to go down precipitously. It's going to drop significantly. And we've already seen evidence through conversations we've had with many educators that people are, in fact, becoming in different fields because of this legislation. That's the positive impact, and that's a significant positive. The negative impact is this. There are educators that want to go into leadership, but they're in a school system unlike a Gwinnett, maybe a small school system in which there's a total of maybe 8 or 10 leadership positions in the entire district. And they know when they get their leadership degree, they may have to wait 2 or 3 or 4 years for that leadership position to come open. And many people are not willing to get the degree and wait 3 or 4 years to receive their compensation. And so I think one negative consequence is likely the fact that in some districts you're going to see a shallower candidate pool because of this. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the positive and the negative that we've seen from, I believe that was House Bill 455 amended by 923.
This is a little off of the topic that we would probably be for here, but I think Scott needs a little more time to get his thoughts together. Do you think at some point we might need to look at whether or not we relax the leadership certificate requirement for an entry-level assistant principal, so that in some of those smaller systems, for instance, they can take that teacher who they have a good feeling that this is somebody who is going to be a quality administrator, and get them started into the administrative field so they can begin that administrative degree requirements while they're doing that.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because approximately an hour and a half ago we were having a discussion about almost the same topic in my office. We would be glad to work cooperatively with you to draft some wording that we feel like would not damage the intent of the bill, which is thousands of educators having unpaid, not being in leadership positions and being paid for it, while at the same time opening up the candidate pool a little bit. And I think there's some wording that we can give you that would mitigate the negative factor we've seen without diminishing what you really wanted to accomplish when you pass the legislation. So, yes, sir, I believe that can be done.
Okay. Any other questions for Dr. Hanson? I believe you're off the hook.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We're close to having a full complement here now. That's good. Scott, are your thoughts collected now? Okay. Then you're up. Everybody's got tracking sheets? Yes. Let me say also, I know we advertised that Friday we would have, of course we'll be back in public hearings on Friday, and we attached the public comment to Friday's meeting. Depending on how much time we end up with this afternoon, how long-winded Scott is, if we have time, we will try to give those of you who are here for topics that we are considering today an opportunity to speak at that point. Okay, Scott, I think we're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for members, I will be as brief as possible, of course, subject to your questions. So, however y'all want to proceed, but as you have questions, let me know, or we'll do it at the end, but we'll want to reserve the balance of time for perhaps public comment. I'm going to be starting on page 6 of 11 on my tracking document, and that is 23.1 on my sheet, which is agricultural education as the first program. I'll be referring to percentages, and those percentages relate to the governor's recommendation. So in agricultural education, the governor's recommendation is an 8% cut. This is actually a doubling of the amount of cut that we took in 11 supplemental, or the governor recommended in 11 supplemental. I will just say for both agricultural education as well as technology career ed, which occurs later, which we generally define as CTAE, we do have some concern about the programmatic impact of doubling the cuts. I'll just make these comments, if I could, that are high level for both programs, and that is, as many of you know, the department and General Assembly members are looking at legislation, and I believe it's House Bill 186 as an example, but generally speaking, the legislation relates to increasing the number of pathways that we have available to students. By increasing those pathways, we'll have to be adding additional funds, or we'll have to be continuing to work around industry certification, as well as supporting the work that the counselors are going to be doing with the students. And so that's a way of saying that we would like to provide a cautionary comment as it relates to the 2 CTAE programs and the 8% reduction. We do believe that a 4% reduction, which would be continuing the amounts that were recommended for fiscal year 11 supplemental, that we would be able to complete the programmatic enhancements even with a 4% reduction. But if we do in fact continue along the path of looking at an 8% reduction, I think it would need to be brought into conversation as it relates to some of the legislation that's out there. As well, programmatically, we know we have more and more students that are impacted in these programs, that are participating in these programs, and so an 8% cut, we believe, would have a negative programmatic impact. In the central office, this is an 8% reduction. As we've talked about in the past, our central office is our most complicated of the programs. It essentially is a third the normal types of central office activities like the State Board and finance and policy, etc. Another third is IT or technology, and then the final third would be very specific programmatic administrative support. We have in fiscal year 11 talked about the reductions in central office that we're able to accomplish vis-a-vis the restructuring that has occurred, where we are converting former contract members over to be staff. It actually is less expensive, and it has to do with the overhead cost of obtaining those contractors. In fiscal year 11 supplemental, as we talked about, the savings that we had to, or that we were able to achieve, needed to go into the LDS project, and that is matching the effort of the state activities in with the $8.9 million that the federal government put in. For fiscal year 12, and the reason we don't see as much impact in this larger reduction for our central office on those IT activities, is the fact that we believe that we will have accomplished what we needed to accomplish with vis-a-vis the federal commitment we had made with state dollars. And so a large part of the savings or the increase in reduction as outlined in the governor's budget will come through the savings that we're accomplishing in the conversion. We will, of course, need to continue to right-size all of our units in the central office. I won't mention what I'm sure everybody is mentioning about lesser staff, about some of our senior staff just retiring, and we are having issues with senior staff that have been working for so many years on different programs, and as they leave, it becomes hard to replace them. But nonetheless, we are, like all the other agencies, looking to increase efficiencies. Superintendent Barge has certainly given his directive to be as efficient as possible, and we will accomplish the 8% reduction, we believe, without major programmatic impact. The charter schools is a 13.4% reduction, which is slightly more than the 8% that I would say would be the baseline reduction for fiscal year 12. That actually has to do with a very specific reduction in the facilities grants area of the charter schools. The facilities grants are typically $8,000 grants that are provided to those entities that are interested in starting up charter schools. It's our belief that the pipeline for charter schools is robust enough at this point that this should not have a major deleterious impact on the charter school operations.
Those are the planning grants, aren't they?
Yes, the planning grants. Did I say facility? Sorry, I meant planning grants, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. The planning grants are the ones that we will be reducing. That $125,000 reduction is actually an elimination of those planning grants for fiscal year 12. The facilities grants are actually very important. This is a relatively small. What's the percentage of that? Is it?
I believe it's 8%.
That is 8%. Yes, sir. So if we look at the sub-program referred to as planning grants, we do believe the planning grants are important. Again, as a reminder, that is the funding that goes to charter schools who do not have the ability to utilize bond funding for their operations, for their facilities and operations. That's an 8% reduction, which we don't believe will have a major impact on the programmatic performance of the charter schools program. The communities and schools reduction, which is line 23.4, is an 8% reduction. Again, this is a very good program. Not all of the funding that is in the communities and schools entities comes from the state. It's about a 60-40 split. But nonetheless, we do believe that the 8% reduction could be accomplished with, I shouldn't say minimal, but it can be managed through the communities and schools.
Do you have an idea what kinds of cuts will have to be made in the programs as a result of those?
Well, they have, each of the communities and schools programs is slightly different because they have local participation, and so the local entities will likely have to put up a little bit more to make up for any of the reduced staffing. Oftentimes those are in the way, those come in the way of facilities, and they're not charging for electricity or those kinds of things. I will have to get you some additional information just because there are more. We'll find out from their perspective which of the entities might be the most impacted, because it would be our intent to spread them on a pro rata basis among the communities and schools activities.
I suspect if we have time at the end of the day, we may hear directly where those cuts may be felt. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
The curriculum development cut is an 11.3% reduction. The governor's recommendation is actually very specific to a contract referred to as Galileo, as we talked about for the 11 supplemental budget. We do understand that there are there's a lot of support for Galileo. It's utilized by a lot of the teachers, and we are looking for ways to be able to absorb this same dollar amount or similar dollar amount reduction in the program while maintaining Galileo. It's our belief that, well, we will be able to manage through that. What we're challenged with the curriculum budget in 2012 is the fact that we are now moving from just having the traditional, or we're changing the math to add traditional as opposed to the integrated. That will have some cost that will have to be absorbed by this program. Additionally, we will be rolling out science, it's our belief, in the Common Core curriculum. Nonetheless, I've talked to the program folks, and we believe that by reducing the number of staff that we hire from school systems to provide support, that we would be able to accomplish this reduction without eliminating the Galileo contract.
Well, I think that sounds like a positive.
The federal funds are both 23.6 and 23.7 are both federal funds. I'd be happy to come back and talk about them or address them at any point, but I'll skip over them for the purposes of this presentation. The Georgia Virtual School, 23.8, that is a 4% reduction, which is less than the 8%, but just want to remind members that we had committed in fiscal year 11 to add an additional 1,700 slots, and those are the state-funded slots, to the virtual school. And we would be committing to maintaining that same level in 2012. So we do understand that there will be a reduction, slight reduction, in the virtual school budget for 2011. We are committed to managing that in 2011. That is to say, we'll have 9,700 state-funded slots available, and we will manage to do the same in fiscal year 12. What we don't know at this point is what the backlog or the potential number of slots would be for 2012. That is to say, if we need or we would like to request more than 9,000 slots, we would like to reserve the opportunity to come to the General Assembly and the Governor in 2012, which we have done in the past. We've come as a sort of a growth adjustment request in the supplemental budget period. So that's a way of saying we could absorb, we believe, programmatically a 4% reduction without material impact. We do, however, want to make sure we're managing expectations and say that if we do, in fact, see a large amount of growth, don't be surprised if we bring the request next year. Of course, it is subject to appropriation. And the way we would manage that is that that growth would be relevant to the second semester for 2012. So there is a way to go back, if necessary, and ask for an enhancement for growth, and we'll have a better idea of what that growth will be in the next budget cycle.
Can you get us some more definitive information on how many slots are actually being used currently? In other words, right now, I know it changes periodically, but
They're still enrolling for the second semester. So
And when will that be finished?
Should be finished, if not Friday, next Friday, but I'll confirm.
Next Friday would be kind of pushing it. If we're just enrolling for the second semester, we ought to be able to have first semester information, right? And some kind of breakdown as to what kind of courses are being taken, how many slots were not being used at the end of the first quarter of the semester.
We will have that, yes, Mr. Chairman.
Members of the committee, I don't mean to be the only one asking questions here.
You don't need to done, Mr. Chairman.
23.9, which is
They're
page...
gonna- they're Okay, I'm sorry, Scott. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. 23.9, which is page 7 on my tracking sheet, is Georgia Youth and Science Technology. The recommendation is for a 100% reduction. Again, this is an area where we do have some concern. We do believe that GYSTC, which is Georgia Youth and Science Technology Center, does provide a very good service. They're a good partner. They work, as many of you will remember, with Kennesaw. Prior funding has been double this amount, and Kennesaw actually stepped up and provided a lot of support in kind. Additionally, the GYSTC entity is able to charge local systems for some services, and they do. We're down to about 20% of their total budget, and that's down from where we've been at 40, and it's high, I guess it's 60% in past years. The point is, we do believe that this is an entity that will be very effective in helping us to meet a challenge that we have in middle school science, particularly 6th and 8th grade. They being Kennesaw State, have been very helpful and very willing to look at helping us with teacher training and teacher certification. So it's a programmatic change in that we'd be looking to have them help us with 6th and 8th graders. They've stepped up and asked us to do that. Our concern is that if the funding goes away entirely, and if this entity goes away entirely, then that might mean that we wouldn't be able to continue those discussions, and we'd have to recreate this type of an entity to help us with middle school science.
What level of funding would you suggest?
Well, somewhere around 150 is where I think it's about as low as we've gone. I know that they're taking a reduction in 11. A slight reduction was about 19,000, so maybe 120, 130. I think the main question, quite frankly, is how does the state continue to show that they support this entity to the extent that Kennesaw believes that there is actually a desire to continue the program. And that's our concern, is that as we go lower and lower, Kennesaw, and I'm not suggesting they've said they would pull out, but Kennesaw may at some point decide that it's not something that they're going to continue to invest time and resources in.
And in our meetings that we've had, I think this subcommittee has indicated a willingness to try to seek that funding.
Yes, sir.
At a level that preserves the program.
Yes, sir.
It remains to be seen as to what level that might be. But
yes, and that would be our concern. I don't have an actual dollar amount, but that would be our desire, is that we have enough to make sure that this entity continues. And we'll be using them for, I'm sure, for other things as well, perhaps with Race to the Top money as we roll that out, and the different districts, there are 26 districts receiving money, may be able to use them. But if there's not an entity there.
Bottom line is it's an important line item, and I think you've got a commitment that we're going to do our best.
Thank you.
And some of the rest of them have taken me to heart, so you've got some more questions here. Number 22.
That's me. I have difficulty understanding the governor's staff recommending this particular cut when he's making so much headlines and publicity in science, technology, engineering, and math. He's pushing that, and yet he's turning around and eliminating the GYST. So if somebody, so that they both talk out of the same side of their mouth. Anybody discussing this with them?
Well, I think actually the STEM initiatives would be, I know that the governor is committed to that. Of course, we're looking at high school, et cetera. One of the residual problems that GYSTC has, I would suspect, is a performance audit that was done some years back, and that was probably 3 or 4 years ago. And that performance audit actually was one of the reasons that GYSTC restructured and joined up with Kennesaw. And I'm just not certain through all of the transitions that the black eye that they received some years ago didn't carry into some of the discussion about whether this is a good-to-have program or a necessary program. Again, I think part of the problem is that GYSTC has traditionally focused on elementary school students, whereas the STEM initiatives, and particularly the areas where the state, I think, is putting additional resources, tend to be in high school predominantly and then also middle school. GYSTC, as I mentioned, is actually in conversation with us about building out and continuing to build out in the middle school. So actually, I think this is less of a value judgment about GYSTC and their potential involvement with STEM as much as it might be our not doing a good enough job in helping the governor's office to understand that they are actually moving into the middle school, and that's an area we'd like to focus on.
Okay. You also have a question from Representative Neal. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Scott, remind me. I know that you've shared this at some point, but there's the state funding. There's funding where they're charging some schools. There's funding from Kennesaw State. There's also funding from private contributions to GYSTC too. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So when you look at the big pot of funding that they have access to, this $150,000 from the state is a small portion?
It would be about 20% of their overall budget.
Okay.
And that's gone down as a percentage, about the same as last year. It would be somewhere around 20%.
And if we withdraw completely as a state, that hinders their ability to seek funds from private contributions because they don't see the buy-in, I would imagine.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And also, as I hear you talking about the expansion of the services that they'll be providing, I would hate to think that pulling the 150 would ultimately kill the program. I really don't think that it would, but if it did, it would cost us a whole lot more than $150,000 to try to offset the losses that we'd realize with that program not being there. Safe to say?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay.
So, just to put some numbers to it, 5 times the benefit. So we're getting 5 times the benefit if we're putting in 20% of their budget. Roughly, maybe a third of it is probably coming from contributions, and a third from what they're charging. I do know one of the problems we would have is if the state were to pull the funding, the local system charge would probably go up. And frankly, in this environment, I'm not so sure how many of the local systems would have the wherewithal to increase their fees for participation with GYSTC. So I think they would have to look for some other way to replace the professional development and the hands-on training that occurs.
So not only are we realizing very good services from them at this point, but we're also getting a bargain for the dollars spent.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're off now. Representative Amerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have supported the Georgia Youth Science and Technology for many years, and I remember about 6 years ago we had a meeting over at Georgia Tech with a lot of presidents from universities around the South and even up the East Coast, talking about science and math and why we were having difficulty in high school and very few moving on to the university system. And the consensus that came out of that was that we generally lose students in about the 4th grade, because the teachers in the 4th grade time frame were telling students, hey, math and science are hard, rather than really being interested in pushing it. And that's when I first met Betsy, and we talked about the help that they provided. in the middle school. So, yes, I applaud them moving on up to high school, but we got to do something about getting the kids in the 4th and 5th grades. And so I will once again push to make sure they have their funding.
Scott, just wanted to point out that, make sure that everybody understands, we're not just talking about one location on one campus in the state, that GYSTC is a number of locations, and that, although they may be anchored very deeply at Kennesaw, they're also in many other different areas and providing services. And again, like Representative Neal said, we're getting a really good bang for our invested dollar.
Yes, absolutely, Representative Austin. And when I said Kennesaw, I'm really referring to their central office operations, and
Right.
that's where Kennesaw is providing support in kind with space, location, et cetera.
Betsy, can you get lobbyist tags for these two?
Sure. The Governor's Honors Program, if I may continue, is 23.1. That is a 10% reduction that we're hoping to accomplish enough earnings in contributions in the foundation that's been set up to be able to offset that 10% reduction. At worst case, and we don't believe this would happen, but worst case is that we would have to charge some of the students up to 10%, which would be less than $200 per student, and that's less than $200 for a full 4-week course. So that's not to say that's what we hope for, but that is worst case, and we just don't think that's going to happen. There's a tremendous amount of grassroots support for Governor's Honors, and we've set up the foundation. We're now working with the State Accounting Office to segregate an account so that folks who are interested can contribute directly for this program and be able to maintain the benefit. So. If necessary, yes, and we don't believe that that's going to be necessary. I should also mention that this program actually crosses fiscal years. And so if, in fact, for whatever reason, we didn't receive money in the foundation, or we had to do something else, there will be another opportunity to discuss this before the second Governor's Honors cycle. That's not our intent, but I did want to just mention that for folks. The Information Technology Services, that's a 0% reduction. That relates to the fact that this is a 5-year contract. This is the contract with AT&T. We really don't have flexibility in negotiating that down. I do want to remind everyone that this actually represents about a fourth of the cost, of the total cost. The federal government funds the other 3/4, and they fund it directly, so it doesn't come through our budget. But I do want to point out that this is where we're providing 1/4 of the cost, and this is for internet connectivity to the central office. Offices, I should say, to all of the local districts. The National Science Center and Foundation, this is a 100% programmatic elimination. That's the same recommendation for 2011 supplemental. We fully agree with that. The program itself has actually been restructured as a result of the state reductions that have occurred in past years, and also some changes in just the National Science Center itself, moving locations, etc. Currently, the program would fund, and we're not funding it in 11, but if we were to fund it in 11, it would have funded, or 12, labs, mobile labs that would move around. I do want to point out, though, that these are not small labs. These are rigs, and they're actually quite expensive. So from our perspective, might be a really good thing to have, but you're talking about a few schools and a very expensive way of getting students in to see science displays. So again, programmatically, it's not cost effective from our perspective.
And it is, Mr. Chairman, thank you. It's my understanding that these mobile labs are spending a significant amount of time outside the borders of the state from time to time. Is that correct?
They may actually go to other states. They may go to other locations. They may go to private schools, and that's fine with us. I can assure you we are not subsidized. Well, actually, we didn't enter into a contract with them in 11, but we would not be funding, and it's never their intent to have us subsidize activities in other states. The non-QBE line 23.13, that actually is several different subprograms, all actually very unrelated, other than the fact that they are in some way formulaic and generally consistent with QBE. Oftentimes they start out as QBE or have some tie into QBE. For example, the RTCs, this line provides the supplemental grants to the RTC students who also receive QBE. This is a get the percentage. Would you mind turning the page on that? What's the percentage? I forget. And this is about an 18% reduction. 18% reduction to the residential treatment center supplemental grant. As a supplemental grant, it is very difficult to say what the true number should be, and we've certainly had this conversation. I do want to mention, Mr. Chairman, that we have met with various folks representing RTC entities. It is our hope that at some point we can look toward getting the RTCs the ability to classify these students in the appropriate QBE category, which from our perspective would be a better financial answer, because the students who would be at, say, a Category 3 would actually receive additional funding, and it would go directly to the center that had that student, as opposed to a supplemental grant which goes to all of the students. So unfortunately we don't have that in place at this point. I think there is some discussion, or there's perhaps some discussion legislatively about allowing the RTCs the ability to report their kids as a Category 3. But nonetheless, as long as it remains a supplemental grant, from our perspective, it's very difficult to say what the appropriate number is. What we would like to see is the state allow the RTCs to report the students in the appropriate QBE category, which would be a better match.
The time frames and the transiency of that, the participants in that program make it very difficult to accommodate a IEP process, and so coming up with some alternate way to average out what the classification would be and letting them be assigned to that, create a new category that fits the general funding mechanism, would seem to be a possibility for achieving what you're trying to say there.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. And in particular, we've met with other state agency representatives, and as it turns out, of course, these students this line is only intended to fund education for these students. They do receive support from other state agencies. Many of these students do, in fact, have SED qualifications in, is it DHR? DHR. They're with DHR. That's a defined term for DHR. And so what we're looking at doing is saying, if you have an SED qualification in DHR, we do believe that's very consistent with what we have in SED as a program. That SED is generally synonymous with Category 3. And so this is the level of discourse we've had. So to the extent that a student has already been qualified for SED by another cognitive agency in Georgia, it would seem to us that we could rely on that for QBE purposes. Currently, students cannot be assigned to Category 3 in QBE purposes until they have an IEP. And Mr. Chairman, as you point out, a lot of these students are only around for 3 to 6 months. By the time they have an IEP, it's too late. Or the timing is such that they don't have an IEP by the time the October count comes. And so if we could get to a point where we could say, if they already have an SED for another agency, that we would allow the coordinators, the FTE coordinators throughout the state, to accept that SED. So it would still be a documentation requirement. But if they're SED from DHR perspective or some other cognitive agency, we would look to that and we would mirror that in the QBE report. That would be a faster way of allowing them, we believe, to qualify.
You wave? Okay.
The special...
Well, just a minute. I think Representative Amerson wants...
My question on this is, isn't there some way we can handle this administratively without changing the laws?
I believe we probably could, and frankly, if we had, what we might end up doing is working with the governor's office and just making sure the General Assembly was familiar. The Board of Education could change a board rule. I'll check with that. We'll need to make sure, but I do believe the State Board of Education could change board rule if we had some kind of information from the governor's office suggesting intent. I think the state auditors would be fine with that. And essentially what we're saying is record keeping. Again, we're not saying that anyone would be able to make the determination on their own willy-nilly. What we're saying is that if there's a cognitive agency that has a defined classification, that we could rely on that classification even though it may not be exactly what we do for educational purposes. And I believe we could accomplish that through state board rule. Now, if we did that, it wouldn't obviously be in the 12 base, and we're talking about 12, it would not be in the 12 base. So the first time we would have the opportunity to have impact would be to allow this coming October, which would be next October, to have those directions in place and to then calculate the difference in QBE, and it would have to be a midterm adjustment at that point. But
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So in the meantime, would you recommend that we reduce the size of the cut in the RTCs?
Yes. I'm sorry, I was looking to see which one. I thought it was 298 at 709. Yes.
Look and see who's listening.
I think it would. Now, I think what we're going to need to do, and we will do this, is go back as an entity and decide how to allocate that reduction. Again, one of our problems is that this grant goes out. There's a formula for the grant. And so what we would need to do is go back and say we're going to adjust the formula, because the intent is not to spread the cut equally. The intent is to say we want to support those students who should have an IEP. There are ways we could accomplish that, and of course we would do that if that's the desire. We work with the governor's office, but the state board, we could change the formula.
Can you, I mean, are you saying that we need to know, you need to have that formula changed before we decide how much
no,
of a
Mr.
cut?
Chairman, I was actually thinking through, and I just realized a better answer. If you
Oh. So you didn't have your thoughts all together yet.
no, sir. Well, here's a recommendation, perhaps. If you recall, with the school nutrition reduction, the tracking document included language that said that the State Department of Education, the State Board, could determine prioritization for the reduction based on the free and reduced lunch rate. Language like that in the tracking document, which could say, and we'll help you, we'll propose some language. If you had language in there that allows us to show the intent of the General Assembly and the governor to prorate the cut differently than across the board, so that we would protect those students who are more like an SED, then I think we could accomplish that in the short term.
Does that work for you? Okay. Yeah. Okay. What about sparsity grants and special needs scholarships?
Well, let's start with the easy one. The sparsity grants are important. They go typically to very small, low-wealth districts. As a practical matter, sparsity grants are extremely small relative to what would actually need to be funded if we were making up for the difference between what a classroom actually has in students and what the funded rate should be. So it is very underfunded to begin with, and programmatically, I don't know how much impact this cut would have, whether you restored it or took more. I think, frankly speaking, the bigger question is whether we should have sparsity, and I think that would be more appropriate when we get to that QBE review task force, whatever the House is proposing. The special needs scholarship. For 2012, this is going to be an interesting question. I would suggest that cutting the special needs scholarship at all for 2012 could be overly conservative. The problem we have with special needs, and the issue that we need to consider, is that the current cohort, which is cohort 4, the current cohort of students who are receiving money by way of us utilizing QBE dollars needs to be put into next year's base. Next year we'll have 4 cohorts that need to be funded. The problem we have is we don't know how many of the students that are currently in QBE will continue into 2012. We also don't know how many of the 1 through 3 cohorts will continue into 12. So we have to do a projection to determine how much money to put into the 2012 base. that projection could either be conservative or it could be, it could be less conservative. I would tell you, for example, this year there's about a $2 million overfunding in the Senate bill, or the special needs scholarship line. But that's the result of students. We're trying to guess how many students are going to stay. In this particular grant, we pay out quarterly, and we track quarterly when students leave. In our experience, the students that are moving into the next year are the most volatile. Less than half of the students will remain, but that's a guess. So we know we're probably $2 million overfunded. If you take the $2 million from this year and you assume half or more will drop out of those students who are currently in, then we know that the base, even without the reduction, is somewhere, if we were guessing, we'd probably, if we wanted to be comfortable, we'd probably put another $2 million in there. But it's an estimate of a formula. So we will have an opportunity in the supplemental to true the number up, to come back and to tell you what the actual number should be. I can tell you I'm sure when the governor's office was looking at this, recognizing that it looked like we already had too much money for 11, we don't know how many are going to stay in. The question is, do you put in too little or too much? And in this environment, I think the view is you put in less, and then you see what happens next year in the supplemental.
Missing the guess by $1 million is that's a pretty good sized miss, though.
Well, what you're saying is what is the rate of students that drop out? Mm-hmm. And what happened is, remember that in this particular grant, parents pay the difference between the QBE and tuition. When the economy started to go bad, fewer and fewer parents were able to supplement their children's educations. And so more and more of the students were dropping out of Senate Bill 10. We were looking at first and second year of operations to try and project forward to determine how many students would remain. That was a bad assumption, yes. I don't know actually what next year would be. If the economy continues to be, if the economy is not good and if private schools raise tuition, we may have more students dropping out than what we would assume. We don't really have a good number at this point to determine what next year's figure should be.
Okay. I'm still of the opinion that OPB and the Department of Ed need to get together on some of the funding difficulties with SB 10 and also with the charter commission schools, because we have similar kinds of problems with how many students are going to be in there or fronting the money for them, those kinds of issues that I think those monies ought to be built into the budget ahead of time instead of coming in after the fact and saying, now we got to come up with $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million to fix what we should have been able to have at least made some reasonable estimates of what it should be. So going forward, I would hope that we will see some of those discussions take place, and if members of this committee can help facilitate that, we would be glad to do that.
And yes, Mr. Chairman, I would agree. Now, and one of the things I want to mention is that we've been working with the budget offices, but we are adding some additional modules to our QBE application to start collecting GTIDs for all of the students. And I think we've talked in the past about the fact that our QBE application was not set up to track by student the way the commission charter schools and in some cases Senate Bill 10 require. We're hoping that by having a better report on specifically which students are in Senate Bill 10, it will help us to project forward. We'll still have some slippage in terms of what's happening because, again, it just depends on whether parents decide to continue to keep the kids in or not, or to come back to the schools. But it is a point well taken, Mr. Chairman, and we are working on a module that will get us better definition about the specific students. And we hope to have that in place for next year. Of course, high-performing principals is no longer available. So if I could move on to 23.14, which is nutrition, this is a 9.8% reduction.
Let me ask you again. don't want to be the only one asking questions, but on the high-performing principals, taking the money out is one thing. Have we stopped the program, too, so that we don't suddenly have some principals signing up to be a part of it, and then there's no money budgeted for it? So,
and the other answer is yes, we stopped letting anybody sign up for it.
okay.
So it was a 3-year commitment. Once we made a determination to do away with this, we still had that residual obligation vis-a-vis the 3 years, but we've not had any others sign up for it.
Okay.
We've not allowed anyone else to sign up for it.
Thank you.
Nutrition's at a 9.8% reduction. That is slightly higher than 8%. One context I want to mention is that is on top of a substantial reduction that was taken into this fiscal year, which was over 20%. The programmatic impact is actually dependent on the school system itself. It has to do with the fund balance and the status of their programs. Ultimately, our concern is meal participation of students. That is, if students will stop participating in the lunch, in eating the lunches, and therefore would not be as prepared to learn because they haven't eaten. Again, so actually, if we wanted to talk about that, it would have to be looking at each individual school system. Another context point is that the state dollars provide about 4% of the overall spend in school nutrition. So it's not a big part of the budgets. It is significant for some of the smaller systems, and I don't want to suggest that it's not a big cut, but in terms of the overall spend for school nutrition, the state accounts for about 4%, a little less than 4% now. The preschool handicap is a 1% reduction, and that 1% is consistent with what we're going to see for QBE, where the governor recommended additional cuts of direct instruction type programs at 1%. Pupil transportation is a 6% cut. Again, this is a formula that is pretty well underfunded. I'm sure many of you know, both from going to the gas station and just probably hearing from your systems, that fuel costs have been going up. And so I appreciate that this is actually less than 8%. But nonetheless, I think transportation itself is going to be more and more funded and shouldered by the local school revenues.
You have a question here, Representative Amison.
You might have to help me here, but in the governor's speech a day or so ago, as reported in the AJC, he brought up the subject of transportation and funding transportation. And I'm sorry I don't remember all of the comments that were made on that. But
I believe that was pre-K.
Was that pre-K transportation?
That's pre-K transportation only.
Sorry about that.
Never mind. Okay.
We need it in post-K.
Yeah. Pre and
Well,
post.
I guess I escaped that one. Although, Representative Amerson, I do want to point out, just because sometimes people don't realize this, that the K-12 system does not fund transportation for pre-K. The other thing I want to point out is that there is a $25 million bond appropriation that typically goes with this, and that's very good news, and we're hoping that will continue. That $25 million is a way of the state bonding out the portion that used to come through this particular formula. So there are actually now two places to look for the total revenue provided for transportation.
You got another question? Representative Neal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a longtime school bus driver, I always have an interest in what we're doing with transportation dollars. What is an approximate percentage of pupil transportation is being covered by the state, and approximately what percentage is being covered by the local systems?
About 22% would be covered by state, so 78 would be covered by local.
So we're not funding pre-K. We're almost not funding K through 12 when we really take an overall look at the cost of pupil transportation. I would love for us to be able to not cut that quite so severely, and I know that there are a lot of areas that we want to not cut so severely, and I understand the dynamics we're dealing with, but that's certainly a critical one. Thank you.
If you can find some place to get some money, we'll be glad to put it into transportation.
That's my job.
That's your job.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Moving to page
Equalization.
23.17, equalization. This is very good news from our perspective. There's a recommendation for 0% cut here. Again, equalization is intended to help the districts that are the least wealthy, and so that's an intent to really help support them at a time when they probably have more need. 23.18 is the local 5 mil share. That is what it is. It has to do with the local tax digests. 23.19 is actual QBE. Again, good news here relative to what we had been anticipating, and that is the governor's recommendation is for a 1% additional austerity cut. However, that 1% is less than what we had been anticipating, and so that is good news from that perspective. There's also, and it's not showing up in this tracking document, but it is in the governor's documents, there's reference to the $141 million in federal RS stabilization monies that will no longer be available for fiscal year 12. And I think again that's context of why the austerity reduction of 1% is that 1%. When you take that and couple it with the federal funding that won't be available, it's more than a 3% reduction. This budget does fully fund growth, which was just under 0.6%, and it does fund training and experience. The RESA line 23.2 here is where here I just want to point out that we do need to look probably at the sub-programs. Programmatically, the reduction is about 24%, which is large. However, when we look at the sub-programs, I would say that the programmatic impact is actually not as significant as it would sound with a 24% reduction. Firstly, the recommendation to eliminate the EdTech Center funding, that's at $1.5 million. That was a DOE request, and that was specifically based on the desire to cut funds and tell you where the best cuts would be if we had to take them. The EdTech Center funding here is really intended to supplement IT activities and the support of IT activities through the RESAs. We still have a fairly robust network of the old education technology centers. Programmatically, if we're looking at this and other areas of the budget, having an IT person staffed at each of the RESAs at a cost of over $100,000 is not as efficient as the impact of having math mentors, where we do in fact have a math problem in the state. And so as you look to 23.2.2, where math mentors are shown, that's an 8% reduction. So our recommendation was totally eliminate the EdTech Center funding because we don't believe it provides as much benefit, and cut the math mentors at only 8%, which is a fairly neutral cut from the 12 from fiscal year 12 perspective. The core funding for the RESAs, that's an elimination of 10%. School improvement, the reduction 23.21, that's a 10.6.
Let's go back to RESAs
Yes,
a minute. Would I be correct in saying, as we talked about it before, that we are going to be continuing to work to the school improvement funds that were in some kind of limbo after the FY11 budget? We had some that was going to be a part of the RESA program, and then we couldn't get that all worked out. Are we going to continue to work on that program?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We will continue to utilize the RESAs where it makes sense and where it's appropriate. We do, in fact, provide the RESAs with a large amount. It's more than $1 million each RESA, with federal funds for needs improvement schools 1 through 3, and then needs improvement schools 5 and above. The State Board and the Department did look to grant funds to the RESAs for the purpose of providing a staff member to support schools that were in needs improvement 4. And needs improvement 4 are, in fact, the schools that we've agreed with the feds that we would support with state dollars. When we were meeting with the RESAs, we learned that the amount of money that we were going to provide them was not sufficient to cover the salary schedules requirement from their perspective. And what we said was, we have people that are going out and meeting with these needs improvement schools, and we'd like you to use these people or use someone else with an equivalent training and experience level. However, we don't see a reason why we would pay more money than what we're already paying. That conversation will continue, and I think this, in the spirit of using the RESAs wherever possible, what we might look to is a model where instead of having a full-time person, we might look to some blended model where the RESA is able to use other components. So we are very much committed as a department to have the RESA staff meet with, the Department of School Improvement staff meet with the RESA staff. We have new leadership in the School Improvement Group, and I can commit to you that those conversations will be better than they were last year. I think talking with the RESAs earlier on we'll be in a better position to understand rather than waiting until we're ready to grant it and then find out that they don't want to take it because they need more to pay the higher salary
Can you
requirement.
keep us abreast of those conversations?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
School nurses, this is a 10% reduction. To
30
my
million.
knowledge, it's $30 million. And there were some years back, and this is probably 4 years ago, there was $30 million, and it was part of the tobacco settlement money. And then this nursing line was moved into state funds. The highest was $30 million.
At the time we moved it out of tobacco money, it was supposed to have been able to draw down federal money under the Medicaid. I'm sorry. What was the reason that it didn't succeed?
I wouldn't know. I think it was Representative Chanel was one of the folks who was behind the hope of obtaining additional matching funds, but it was not through the Department of Education. So I actually don't have insight into what they were hoping to do and what was or was not accomplished with the funds.
Okay.
Do you have a question?
Oh, yes, ma'am. I don't. The reason for moving the funds from being lottery to the funding source moving it from lottery into state funds had to do with obtaining additional matching funds. But it didn't. The second part of that, which is obtaining the matching funds, wasn't.
No, your microphone. Thank you.
SED is the recommendation is for a 1% reduction. That's very similar to the QBE austerity cut. State interagency transfers, I don't have the percentage, but that's a number that's actually calculated and actually just transferred through our budget line, so we don't really calculate those numbers. The state schools is a 1%.
Does that end that program that we were cutting in the interagency transfers, the testing component?
Oh,
there?
yes. In the interagency transfers, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, there is one line. One of the sub-programs, actually, there was $550,000 that's continuing from 2011, where we had identified that those funds were not being actively engaged in fiscal year 11, and so we've recommended to continue that in fiscal year 12.
Okay.
So that was in our purview, and that's just a continuation of what we've done in 2011 supplemental. The state schools recommendation is 1%, and that's similar to QBE. The only comment I'll make there is that we do believe that there would be training and experience. And remember that because these are the state schools, they don't actually get QBE, so there is no adjustment for training experience or growth. But technology and career ed, I've referred to already at the opening when we talked about ag ed. We bundle technology career ed with ag ed under CTAE. And so the comment about the pathways and the additional work that needs to happen there suggests that this 8% reduction would be programmatically very difficult. Testing, there's no reduction. And then the tuition for the multi-handicap.
What about Iowa tests, basic skills, ITBS?
The state is not funding the ITBS.
Did they fund them in 11?
No, not this year. Last year, I believe we did fund some portion, but last year the policy on ITBS was changed and allowed local school systems to offer the ITBS or some equivalent. And there were several systems that chose.
Let me make sure I understand what you're saying now. In FY10 they were funded, but FY11 they were not?
Correct.
Okay.
And it was in FY10 that the state board rule changed that allowed school systems to not have to take the Iowa test of basic. They were allowed to take an alternative, gosh, what's the term? Norm referenced assessment.
Representative Ash?
How much of this line item is development of new tests in terms of the line item? Given the test. Which new tests are we developing?
I'll have to get you some analysis, but let me give you a generic answer, and that is that most of our tests, in fact all of our tests, I would say most of our tests are based on five-year applications. That is, we put it out for bid for 5 years. And when the vendors bid on the 5-year structure, they develop course development through all 5 years. And it's an iterative process, and it's a big negotiation process. There are many test vendors who are bidding who ask to have all the development costs put into the early years, and we always push back and say, no, we want to spread the development cost. So as a practical matter, we've been able to get all of the vendors to spread development cost through the course of the years. We're now on year 5 for most of our tests. And so I don't know off the top of my head what the exact percentages of development. I will say that because of that blended cost rate, the proposals that came in, it's hard to know exactly what the percentage is. I think going forward, the question would be, because we're in the process now, after next year, we're going to have to rebid all of these contracts. And as we start talking about EOCT contracts that will have to be developed and have further development, and a high school graduation test that we may eliminate, we're going to be looking at, for 2013 in particular, we'll be looking at cost savings and increases for potential development, and we're hoping the balance of those two will be either some savings or very little change.
As we talk about Common Core assessment, how is that going to fit into our testing model? When are they anticipated to come online?
The Common Core testing requirement is, I believe, 2014. Is it 14 or 15? I believe it's 2014.
So will be within that next 5-year period?
Yes, ma'am. It will be for math and ELA. Now, our curriculum and our tests have actually been aligned, or I should say our GPS is very much aligned with the Common Core curriculum. And as a result, Georgia is, I don't know if lucky is the right word, because we've actually had a lot of input into what the Common Core standards would be. But Georgia is currently very aligned with the new standards for Common Core. And as a result, it won't require us to redevelop a lot of questions. It won't require us to redevelop a lot of our GPS, the curriculum when we give it. It will be a matter of, because the standards are the same, we've developed questions for those standards. Those questions may have to be reconfigured. Some of the questions we might have been giving in 5th grade, and now they might have to be given in 4th grade. But that's not a matter of developing a question, which is more expensive. It's simply a matter of determining which grade level that test question would be given in. The requirement will be to have the Common Core tested in 2014, I believe. That's the plan. And it wouldn't be everything, because the Science Common Core is not out yet. It'll come out next year. The Common Core, ma'am? Yes, I was about to say the Common Core assessment, because we have a Common Core, it lends itself to a Common Core assessment. However, my understanding at this point is that there will not be one Common Core assessment, meaning there's not going to be one vendor chosen by, say, the federal government, and thereby they say, here is the provider. There will be a Common Core, and a vendor will have to provide tests for the Common Core. Now, it's our belief that as most states now have a Common Core, the test itself should be less expensive. But each state is allowed to have some variability up to 15% in their curriculum. So there won't be one vendor and one uniform test. Well, the advantage will be, though, it'll be several vendors that will compete, and any of those vendors that win will be able to offer generally the same test to a larger number of states, and the cost should come down. That's the hope. But it will still be, there will still be a competitive nature to the bidding.
I follow up on Representative Ash's question. I was under the impression, and it seemed like you were, that we would be better able to compare Georgia with other states, but that's going to require that the Common Core be a little more regulated than what I am understanding you to say, and maybe you could say it a different way, if that's the way it's supposed to be.
Well, Representative Amerson, I know you like your student statistics, so I would say, honestly, the variability is in that 15% ability to differ. The goal of the Common Core is, in fact, to have comparable statewide tests. However, because whoever has created the Common Core has allowed 15% variability, there will not be a total apples to apples. What one will be able to say, though, is that the curriculum itself is fundamentally similar, and so the students are, they will be comparable, certainly more comparable, say, than the Georgia GPS to the Tennessee, whatever their curriculum is. But it won't be that one uniform test that all the students take at the same time, which could be scored and scaled like the Iowa test would be. It'll be something in between. It'll be better than we have now, certainly more comparable, but it won't be perfect. It won't be that perfect alignment that a statistician or a lot of our educators would look for comparability.
Thank you.
The last was tuition for the multi-handicapped. That's a 1% reduction, similar to QBE.
That would be the last line item.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, so subject to your questions.
To my questions.
Or any questions.
Yeah. Questions from anyone? You've outlasted most of the committee. But that will give us some time for some public input. I appreciate your hard work of you and your staff. We will look forward to quickly getting the answers to those couple of things that we've asked for.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And I know Christine will follow up. And that's
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have a sign-up list, so we're going to be just kind of first one of the microphone gets to talk. But if you would, give us your name and your reason for living.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Gamble with the Georgia Association for Career and Technical Education, and I will be brief because I know we all want to go home. But just to reiterate what Scott mentioned about career, technical, and agriculture education funding for 2012, as many of you know, we've got House Bill 186 that will require these 16 national career pathways and the development of those. There's just some increased costs that will be there, and currently there's about an 8% reduction to those funds for 2012. we're happy, obviously, for whatever we can get, and we'll deal with that. But just, again, want to reiterate what he mentioned to you about the impact of an 8% reduction for fiscal year 12. And also, every dollar that's spent in career technical and agriculture education is matched by federal funding through the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act. So when you add a dollar, you get a dollar. When you take a dollar, you lose a dollar. But these are all of our ag ed programs, marketing ed, business education, family consumer science, technology, healthcare, at-risk population, and JROTC programs are included in this as well now. So, again, I know y'all know these programs well, and I appreciate your support, but we'll just ask for your consideration for that in this next fiscal year. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Yes, you may ask him a question. I'm sorry, I didn't see you winking there.
I don't believe that has been done yet, but
So we passed it out of the subcommittee without a fiscal notice?
With your aye vote.
Will it be done before we bring that bill to the full committee?
I don't know, and that's a good question for Representative Nix, but if you want me to, I can try to find out for you.
Please find out where the fiscal notice is. If you're asking for more money, we better figure out before we pass it out of committee.
Sure, absolutely.
That's fine. That was a good question.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Norma Adams. I'm with the Georgia Association of Homes and Services for Children, and I represent the providers of residential services to the behaviorally and emotionally disturbed children that are in Georgia's foster care system. I want to thank this committee for recommending that in the amended budget that the cut be restored to the residential treatment centers grant, which amounted to about $150,000. Appreciate that. The Senate only recommended half the restoration, and we're hoping that the conference committee will take the House position in that residential treatment center grant. As the committees and Scott so aptly have shown, the grant to the residential treatment centers to provide educational services to children who reside in these facilities do not cover the costs of educating these kids. There's a lot of problematic areas in this grant, one of which is the fact that these kids are so transient, and the QB formula doesn't recognize the intensity and the educational disabilities that these children have. Also, too, because of the transient nature of these children, the count for how they figure the formula doesn't capture what is truly going on. And also, this grant has never covered the true cost of educating these children. So we hope that you do restore this cut, that you make these facilities whole. As Scott said, that this cut represents about 18% in the grant itself since 2009, and that's a significant cut for these agencies. So we do hope that you restore this cut.
Okay. Thank you. I don't see any questions, so I guess you're all right.
Hey, I'm Margaret Ciccarelli, representing Page. Thank you for allowing me to speak very briefly today about school nurses, and I know that y'all have already talked about that, and that every year we seem to revisit this issue as money is taken out. And those of us who think that nurses are of the utmost importance urge you to put it back, which you have in the past, and we really appreciate that. It's very timely that we're talking about this today. Just at lunch today, I received a call from my child's school nurse and was reminded of the importance of that. My child has, unfortunately suffered from some health problems, and I can tell you that it is so reassuring to have the nurse call to give me an update and to ask me some questions about her care plan. And I know that it's not only important to me, but to lots of parents with children enrolled in public schools across the state. Not only that, but our educators are allowed to do their jobs and teach, when nurses are there to dispense medicine and perform other necessary procedures and check out students who have health concerns. So I know that we talk about it perennially, but I want to bring it up again about how important we at Page think school nurses are, and urge you, if you can find it, any money, anywhere, please add some back for nurses. Thanks.
Thank you. Nurses are important. I've certainly seen that.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and to the committee. My name is Betsy Green. I'm with the Georgia Youth Science and Technology Centers, and thank you very much for your continued support in our program, for the supplemental budget, and for your willingness to work with us in 2012. Indeed, the state has been a partner with us for 19 years. We've been in business for 21, and it has been so important, this partnership that we've had. The need for our services is greater today than it was 21 years ago, and our executive director, Dr. Butler, he's going to speak a little bit about the greater need. We'll be just very brief.
Thank you, Frank Butler, Executive Director, GYSTC. I want to thank some of you already who have commented on what we do. We don't have any openings in our marketing department because we don't have one. But we are a timely organization that's built 13 centers, Representative Austin, over the state of Georgia. And we're located at universities, REISs, and museums. So that's an example of the kind of support we receive elsewhere. We just think that well, let me say something. I have talked to a number of teachers at GSTA, and they tell me that they're not teaching any science, maybe a day a month right now. Well, I'm sorry. I hope that I don't get quoted, but I'll quote. I didn't collect their names, by the way. But they're going to have to wedge science in now, and I'm a scientist. I'm not a teacher educator or anything else. I'm a scientist, and I know how important this situation is. So I urge you to keep us in the budget, and we promise to give you service. One other point I want to make, of the money the state gives us, okay, this year $8,000 will actually go to administration and $130,000 goes to programs. So Representative Neal, when you mentioned that what we're doing is actually subsidizing the school's professional development costs with state funds, and that's very critical to those schools who have this year had almost no money except for Title I money to get the kind of training they need. We will see huge needs for training starting in 2012 with the implementation and assessment of the new AYP standard in science. Thank you.
Just a minute. I think you've got a question from Representative Ash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As we're moving toward the Common Core in science, how involved is your institution in the development of that curriculum so that you can be involved with professional development or whatever else is needed?
Well, we have Steve Rich, who came from the Board of Education. We got him back at GYSTC West. He's nationally plugged in. I was on the Achieve board that worked on the Common Core standards. Right now, we're pretty comfortable that there will not be, especially in grades K through 8, not be very significant changes. There'll be some reorganizations. And by the way, our curriculum is all, we have our own curriculum for training teachers and training students. We served about 90,000 teachers, students and their parents, and about 12,000 teachers last year. All of our training materials are by number tied to the Georgia Performance Standards and will be tied to the Common Core Standards. Did I answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm Mary Frances Williams, and I'm here on behalf of the Georgia School Nutrition Association. I know I've talked to all of you about this before, but I just want to say it one more time. And actually, it's so hard to sit here and listen to all the cuts to education. I mean, I have two boys who are educated in public schools up in the Cobb County school system, and both of them got a great education, and it's just really kind of heartbreaking listening to all these cuts. But I'm here to talk to you about school nutrition, and about the state funds and the cut to state funds, and I appreciate what Scott has said about that. I just want to remind you all that we've had since since fiscal year 2009, we've had 39% cut to state funds. I know state funds is a small percentage of overall school funding for overall funding for school nutrition, but school systems get federal funds different school systems get federal funds, and it depends upon the number of the percentage of free and reduced lunch kids they have. So when you have school systems that have more kids who are less kids who are eligible for that, it means that they're more reliant on these state funds, and they have a bigger gap to make up. So thanks for thinking about us as you make all these difficult decisions.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Sandy Addis. I'm director of Pioneer RESA up in Cleveland, Georgia, and much of which is in Representative Amerson's district. RESAs are not trying to save jobs. We're trying to save Georgia money. The 16 RESAs of Georgia, we believe, save a tremendous amount of taxpayer dollars for Georgia, and we want to keep doing that. What we need is an infrastructure on which we can build that saving mechanism. Your 16 RESAs host a wide variety of different entities, such as GYSTC, which makes a local GYSTC able to generate other funds. Several of the RESAs operate purchasing agencies. In my case, we operate an agency that handles $6 million in school supplies, and we think we save at least 20% to the school systems in those purchases and drive the price down because other people have to compete with us in doing so. We have to provide a base infrastructure, even though I think the idea to roll the education technology centers into RESAs is an excellent one, and we had begun to do that with several of the RESAs and integrate them. We do have to maintain a basic technology infrastructure in order to deliver the professional learning and the communication, because we can do it so much cheaper that way. So what we would ask you to do is simply consider the fact that we don't want to lose our ability to help Georgia save money. There's two things I personally don't want my RESA to do, and I bet I'm speaking for the other 15 RESA directors in this. We do not want to have to turn down or do a very poor job of assisting the department in rollout of various entities, various initiatives. Not a month goes by that RESAs don't get a request from somewhere in the Department of Education to assist in a distribution of information, of training, of redelivery. We don't want to do that poorly because it will cost Georgia money in the long run. It'll hurt children. The other thing we don't want to do is cut services which will pass huge savings loss back onto the school systems. For example, I have and several other RESAs do this, I have an environmental inspector that does all the playground mold, asbestos, mildew, and fuel tank and radon inspections for 110 schools. I can do it at about 10% the cost. I don't want to have to give up those kinds of services and cause those systems to have to eat that cost. So I would encourage you to keep us an infrastructure so we can, in fact, save Georgia money. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for just a moment to speak. I won't take so much of your time because my colleague, Dr. Addis, just spoke. I'm Stephanie Gordy. I'm the director of Griffin RESA and president of the RESA Directors Association, and I just want to echo what my colleague, Dr. Addis, said and explain how we need the infrastructure. I have a graphic here. I have a copy for everybody. Time is money, so that's just a very simple graphic just to show you that based on the estimated FY12 budget, we would have taken a 41% cut over the last 2 years. We don't have an ETC at our RESA. We've embedded those activities with professional development and school improvement. My IT specialist makes $33,000 a year and is currently vacant and has been vacant for 3 weeks because he was got a 20% salary increase when he went to work for the government, the county government. I just ask that you give us a sustainable infrastructure so that we can continue keeping the best school improvement specialists and professional development individuals out there. And I know you have to make tough decisions. Your job certainly isn't envious, but I do thank you for the time, and I understand that we all have to take cuts, but you can see the 41% cut. Is that okay? Thank you.
No, you got a question. You need to move down here where your flashing light's going to be closer to me.
Sure.
I understand that it's a bad cut. I understand sort of in theory what a RISA does. But I'd love to know at the Richmond, how many people you have on staff. What do they do?
Okay. We have an annual report that we submit every year. If I can get your contact information, I'll be glad to send that to you.
Wonderful. And if you do the same for the other RISA,
Okay.
it's hard to figure out how to defend the line item, and I don't know enough about it.
That's a very fair question, and I just appreciate the opportunity to share what we do. There are some similarities across all RISAs, but because we report to a local board of control and it's based on those system needs, it may look different in each RISA. So in Dr. Addis's RISA, there may be an environmental expert. In our RISA, we may offer some slightly different services. What we do have in common is we all offer professional development for our systems, and we all offer school improvement services.
And are there any cases where what you offer overlap with what the State Department of Education?
We do. We have a partnership and work together for school improvement, but we report to our a local board that's made up of all the school superintendents in our region and the college presidents in our region and the public library director. And so we offer those. Sometimes our services are different because it depends on what the local school system needs. Thank you.
You have one more question, I believe, or statement or something.
I was just going to point out, I really appreciate all the work that the RISAs do, and I appreciate the gentleman before us, who's actually from my neck of the woods in Cleveland. Kind of left me out there. I was kind of hanging. But I was just crunching your numbers right here, and before you hand that one out again, that's a 33% reduction rather than a 41% reduction.
I think what we were doing is it 41% from 2 years? It's 21% from last year,
Yep.
I think, in our skate numbers. And then when you look at it cumulatively, if you're adding the 16 and the 24, it adds up to 30-something. But if you look at the bottom number from the FY10, that's a 41%, I believe. Am I correct or am I wrong?
No, ma'am, you're wrong.
Okay. All right. Well, I will go back and definitely change that.
I knew you weren't adding those numbers together, but if you go from the fiscal year 10 and you divide it out by the fiscal year 12, that's a 33% reduction.
We will definitely look at that. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, check it, because he's a biology teacher. He's not a math teacher.
I'll check it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is Rob Dennis. I'm the CEO for the National Science Center, and I don't want to make light of the situation, but the math for our reduction is pretty simple. We've gone from a high of $1.4 million during my tenure at the Science Center to zero. The National Science Center has existed since 1985 in the state of Georgia as a function of public law, partnered with the U.S. Army. We deliver, with all due respect to Mr. Austinson, we deliver much more than two 18-wheelers across the country. We have 16 outreach programs that we deliver across the country, but which Georgia is the primary beneficiary of. Up until as of December this year, we shut down a 130,000 square foot science center that had served historically 125,000 students annually. Through outreach across the state of Georgia, we deliver about programming to about 60,000 students, host an ETC, and work closely with RISAs and colleges and universities across the state. We just received a call from Oak Ridge National Labs, by way of example, last year to deliver their Farming for Fuel program. It's a good program. It's a solid, I'll say it's a great program. It's solid. We want to keep it in the state of Georgia. It's possible to keep it in the state of Georgia. We are restructuring, as Mr. Austinson referenced, The DOE had requested that we focus our resources on outreach. We deliver to some of the most underserved, under-resourced counties in the state effectively and efficiently, and frequently with no charge to those districts or students or teachers. And where we do charge, it's not even at cost. So I have a bunch of notes that I could run through, but I know we have limited time here. But I would ask for the committee's full consideration. I know Jay came down and saw the Science Center before we closed, but there's everything that we developed there, we spun out across the state of Georgia, and then because of the partnership with the U.S. Army, it is the National Science Center, and that is why we send those 18-wheelers across the country and other programs. But locally, we have a fleet of minivans that we send out for Science to Go, Fast Track Science, Star Labs, Farming for Fuel. Those are probably some of our most popular. Learning Logic was a year-long algebra curriculum. We've aligned these programs to the previously the QCC, now the GPS. We've got 7 master's level educational specialists, 2 PhDs who align these programs to the standards and make sure that the educational integrity exists for those programs.
Okay, I believe you got a question, Margaret.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dennis, I know we had a good conversation,
yes.
And I have more of a sense of urgency as a result for your center. But if the funding is not cut and you still have plans to scale down, is that right? Scale down the operation within the acreage of the building?
Correct. We will sell. We've listed the current Science Center proper facility for sale. We won't have a Science Center proper. That is something that DOE has historically identified as something they would prefer not to fund by way of a contract, that they want to fund, as it was related by Juan Carlos Aguilar to me, outreach to those communities that otherwise would not have an opportunity to get the STEM content that we develop, furnish, procure, send out.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You got one more. I saw it this time.
How do you and the youth science and technology work together?
We've talked just on the periphery. I think we have very similar missions, but we're not working hand in hand. That's a great question.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Paige Olson. I'm a parent of older children in the DeKalb County, used to be in the DeKalb County school system. And I've just made a couple of notes based on the information that the Department of Education provided us today. Going back to a meeting a few weeks ago at the Emory-La Vista Parents Council, which is a very good source of information, Joe Martin, who helped to create the QBE formula many, many years ago, gave us a pretty good definition of how the formula works. And even though the State Department said that a 1% austerity cut was a pretty good thing, I think 0 would be better. Based on my understanding of how the formula works and how it affects us, our students today, the funding provided by the state is now about $2 billion less than intended. This shortfall equates to about $30,000 for a class with 25 students. We know we have more students in classes than that. So I think any cuts in funding at this point is very detrimental in the long run. So I am looking forward to the committee's recommendations on the new QBE formula down the road. A couple of notes. Any cuts in science and technology would be very detrimental to all of our students, as we're all working towards encouraging science, math, and technology. If we start pushing it in middle and high school, we have lost our children. We need to start them at the very beginning and get them interested and excited in science, and a lot of that has to do with hands-on experimentation, and anything we can do to help encourage that. We might have some future scientists down the road and that may very well choose to live in our beloved state. Nutrition, any cuts in nutrition, just me purchasing very fresh, good food at the grocery store, it's a lot more expensive than the food that's canned and in the middle of the aisles. So any cuts, I think, would trickle down to local boards of education having to decide whether or not they're going to give fresh food or canned food to their students. And then one other note. Nope, that was it. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Lamar Veach. I'm the state librarian with the Georgia Public Library Service. And I just, if I'm the last one to speak, maybe I'm not. Okay, I'm sorry. I do want to give a thank you to the Scott Austenson and the Department of Education for taking a second look at the Galileo funding program. This is a phenomenally cost-effective, economy of scale, collaborative program that involves the universities, the public libraries, the public schools, the technical colleges, as well as the private colleges and universities. And it serves for pennies the kinds of quality information that you can't get any other way. It provides all that great science information, updated science materials, and so I appreciate the thoughtfulness at which this has been discussed and answered, and we appreciate it from the public library point of view because the partnership of this Galileo program is really what makes it unique in the entire country. So we want to make sure that's made available so that all of the quality research materials that can be made available through the Galileo program is available to every student and every resident of the state. And I thank you for your support.
You have a couple of questions. Representative Ash?
It's been a perpetual question, and I'll ask it again.
Yes.
Are there
Okay.
any school media centers and libraries under the state system that actually work together and not duplicate materials?
I think there is a lot of collaboration at the very local level where the librarians talk with each other. Even through the RISAs, we have under state law, and it was just mentioned, each RISA has a public library director representative within that RISA area that sits on that RISA board, and I would think that there are some discussions about that. Some duplication is going to be necessary. That's just the way that libraries are put together. But certainly they locally recognize the strengths of each other and play off those strengths. I think as a team would play. But there's nothing at the high state level that decides what that some materials are going here rather than over here.
Do you know of any that actually cohabitate a lot of
Excuse me?
I'm not really aware of any. There may be some in the Columbus area because that public library is under the Columbus School Board, which is different from anywhere else. But I'm really not aware of any. Most of the time, very honestly, they don't work because of the nature of the different users that come to those libraries. They have worked in some places, but all the right elements have to be in place for that kind of joint collaboration to really work. It's not an easy thing to accomplish.
We struggle so hard to fund media centers.
I know. Well,
We struggle so hard to fund y'all.
I know.
That to have these two sets of entities, there's always something you need to do.
They are doing different jobs. They really are. One supports the curriculum, one supports the public. So they really are, but they're certainly, the public library is there to provide that backup resource where perhaps the school media centers aren't as strong as they should be. So we hope we're that safety net in a lot of places, but that's why the Galileo program is so important, because it does provide that universality of rich resources through the different databases and the Georgia online the online Georgia Encyclopedia and the Digital Library of Georgia, which is available too through that Galileo program.
We have a couple more questions here. Margaret Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Veach, it was good to be with
Hello
you this
again.
morning. I just wanted to ask if there's a way for us to access ourselves Galileo to, or is there...
Absolutely.
'Cause I
Every
would love
resident
to
of the
just sort
state
of-
can, through their local public library at least, can get the password.
Okay.
And you access that through Galileo. I believe it's ga.galileo.org, but certainly you have the access to the full complement of materials as a Georgia resident.
Because I learned a lot about it when we were making the cut, but I'd like to experience it. Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say one thing and I don't take this privilege very often, but with all the cuts that are being made in the budget, and as hard as it is for every one of us, Amy and I both have children in the public school system, so it's heart-wrenching with every cut. But things like you're doing, Dr. Veach is partnering with Zoo Atlanta, where kids who couldn't otherwise afford to go to the zoo and get the educational experience can go and check out passes at the library system. So those kind of creative, out-of-the-box partnerships are just really to be recognized, I think.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It was just announced this morning, as a matter of fact, as a program. So every public library in the state has the passes so that a family can go to the public library, borrow that pass for a week, come to Atlanta, and experience the zoo. So we think it's a great partnership with that wonderful institution. Thank you.
Representative Amerson, you still got one more.
I just wanted to add what you said earlier about the cooperation. In Dahlonega, of course, we have the school system, we have the library, and we also have North Georgia College and State University. And while it's not totally integrated, the university encourages the local people as well as high school students to come into the university and use the library there. And the high school librarian and middle school media people work very closely with the county library to establish a summer reading program and various other programs that are really the output is through the local library. So
well, as I reinforces what my response to Representative Ash is that so much collaboration does go on at the local level when they recognize that there are things in common. So we will continue this kind of good collaboration. We think it's the best way to approach providing services. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 5 more minutes, and so
I'll be fast.
can I have that in writing?
Yeah, I will. I have some questions, but I'll ask those separately. As I listen to everybody, and I know the cuts are bad, and our general feeling about the 2012 budget has been, thank goodness, because it's so much better than what we were afraid it was going to look like as we came into this session. But as I listen to everybody come to you and talk to you about the cuts that their particular interest is facing and asking for more money, it occurred to me that every subcommittee meeting across the Capitol, they're all getting a long list of people asking for more money. And K-12 did fare much better, as I said, than we expected it to. And I guess there will be an ensuing battle among all the subcommittees. So, Mr. Chairman, please hang tough.
I will at least hang, I can tell you that.
Because I do think that the governor did a good job of trying to prioritize where the cuts went, and I know other agencies took it much harder than the Department of Education and what goes directly to the school systems. So I'm very grateful for that and the work that y'all are doing, and just hang on to the money. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Albert Coleman with Communities in Schools of Georgia. Our program really helps kids turn around, helping those kids who would have otherwise dropped out of school. We do understand the budgetary constraints that you're faced with, and the cut is about 8%. As you go forward, we actually see how, if it's possible, as much as you can, to see how that 8% can be reduced. because what happens is it puts a strain on the local programs to leverage the funds that you give. At the moment, for every dollar you give, we are leveraging $22 to help the kids stay in school. So just take that into consideration as you go forward. We do understand the constraints that you're faced with.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, wait a minute.
It's not a question.
Not a question.
Comment.
A comment.
I do. I have a comment.
Sure, you've got the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to just mention, for those of you who are so interested in science, I was telling my colleague here that I had the wonderful opportunity of going on the bus trip with the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education this past October. And I think we're missing the boat. I'm a high school teacher, so I was trained in one area specific to my field. And I think what we're doing wrong at the elementary school level is we're having K through 5 teachers teach all these subjects, and they do a fantastic job. However, we visited one of these schools where they had a science lab. It was an elementary school. They had a science lab with a real science teacher who took the kids in by grades. You know, she had a schedule for each hour of her day through every week. She had one class of first graders at 9 o'clock in the morning, then a set of third graders at 10 o'clock in the morning. But they had a lab with hands-on spiders and snakes and all the great stuff that you get at the high school level that you don't normally see at the elementary school level. But I feel like probably if we watch those kids through the years grow up, that we'll probably have an abundance of more scientists in that group than we have in your average elementary school. That's just my opinion, and I'm glad I got that opportunity. But here, never mind. It's just a comment, because I know we have such a need for science, and I think that's where we're missing. It was my comment for the day. Take it as you will.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to echo what Representative Carter just said. You lose them if you wait until middle and high school. You've lost them, and in this. You know, science is obviously something that's important to me, and as one that has actually taught summer science camps in bug camp and in reptile and amphibian camp, and gotten kids outside running around chasing things and catching things and doing things their moms usually don't let them do unless somebody who knows what they're doing is with them. Those kind of events turn out to be seminal events in these kids' lives that may turn somebody around and keep them interested in science, and I think that's where the future of science education at the K through 5 level is really going to be, is in the administration of science in that regard, and getting kids, just getting them outside and encouraging them to do things other than play Xbox all afternoon when they come home. And then, Mr. Chairman, the last thing I want to do is for my friend, my Griffin Risa friend back there, I wasn't trying to be mean to you. Christine told me I was being mean. I was having a little bit of fun in a long meeting, and I apologize if it was construed that way.
We'll apologize for his sense of humor. Having gone through this entire FY12 budget for education, if you include the federal stimulus funds that we won't have, I think we've got several $100 million to try to restore. So I'm not sure I can hang tough enough to get all that back. But we will. I know that this committee, particularly through the FY11 amended, worked very hard to try to restore the things that they were able to, and they will continue to do that. If your program is not one of those that gets restored, it doesn't mean that they don't think it's important. It just means that we ran out of dollars. So we appreciate each of you for being here and helping us to understand the value of your programs. Scott, as always, we appreciate your hard work, and we look forward to more hard work from you. This meeting will be adjourned. We will be back in session, committee, at 8 o'clock on Friday morning. No, we're not here then. Where are we? 506, up one floor. And we will be hearing from DECAL and the retirement systems and public comment.